Hey there, my name is Brittany and today I'm going to be making old-fashioned lard soap with lard that I rendered myself at home. If you didn't watch my last video, go ahead and check that out. That's where I show you how to render your own pasture-raised lard from pig fat. Lard is a minimally processed, healthy source of fats. And if you get it from a local farmer, pasture-raised, it's so healthy for you. And it's useful in many ways. Today I'm going to be using it in a cold processed soap recipe. Alright, so the first thing you have to do is find a lye calculator online. This is where you're going to input your oils that you have and want to use, and the calculator will tell you how much sodium hydroxide that you should use if you're making a hard bar of soap, or potassium hydroxide if you're making liquid soap. But I've never made liquid soap. So, you'll come down to the calculator here and you'll enter sodium hydroxide. I prefer to read the recipe in ounces, but you can choose whatever you'd like there. Super fatting is, well, here recommended to be 1 through 10. I know if you're making like a bar of soap with just coconut oil, it's recommended to use a higher super fatting value, but right now I'm going to choose a value of 7. And superfat is the amount of fats that's left over after the saponification process has happened. And the saponification process is when the lye mixes with the fats and they combine, and so there's no longer any lye in your soap once you use the bar of soap, but there will be 7% fat left over in this particular bar. So how much water you put in your soap, 33% to 38%, and this is going to affect how long it will take for your soap to get to trace. I just chose 35%, somewhere in the middle there. And then I chose the oils that I will be using, which is lard and coconut oil, and I entered the amounts that I will be using there. And the amounts that I'm using are just based on how big my mold is, which is about 54 ounces. So this recipe has a little bit extra at the end. So at the bottom of the calculator, it asks for herbs and fragrances, etc., additives that you're going to put in your soap. I'm not going to put anything in the soap. It's just going to be a very simple bar of soap. So the reason I added coconut oil at all to this soap was when I calculated the soap without coconut oil and lard only, it had 0 cleansing properties and 0 lather properties. So I kind of fiddled with the recipe a bit until those properties were in the suggested ranges. This bar of soap is just kind of mid-range for most of those. It's a little bit lower on the conditioning side and the lather side, but I have been told that this bar of soap is very moisturizing by people who use it, so I'm not too worried there. So there is your total batch weight. You'll want to make sure your molds are big enough to hold the amount of soap that you're making. And then over here is the fatty acid profile. Before this video, I actually didn't know much about fatty acids, but I've made this bar of soap a handful of times now, and I figured maybe I should look into fatty acids and see what this is all about. What I learned is some of these are saturated fats and some of them are unsaturated fats. The unsaturated fats are fats that lend to a slower trace. It'll take a longer time to mix until you reach trace. And I'll show you trace when I'm mixing the soap. That's when you know that you're done and you can put your soap in the mold. And the saturated fats are trace accelerators. So here I have about an even amount of unsaturated fats and saturated fats. So it'll be interesting to see just how long this bar of soap takes to get to trace. I also learned that lauric is an excellent cleanser, so is myristic, and palmitic, and also stearic Both lend to a hard, stable soap with a creamy lather and increased lifespan. Okay, so here is my recipe. I'll be using 30 ounces of pasteurized lard that I rendered myself. I'll be using 8 ounces of coconut oil that I added to the recipe just so the properties were in their suggested ranges. I have 13.3 ounces of water going into the recipe, and I have 5.3 ounces of lye, or sodium hydroxide. After you have your recipe, if you want to add a fragrance, I go ahead and go over to Brambleberry's fragrance calculator. If you use too much fragrance, you could cause skin irritation, and if you use not enough fragrance, you might not be able to smell it. So Brambleberry's calculator is really cool. It gives you a light, medium, and heavy amount that you could use. So here we go. The fragrance that I'm using today is frankincense essential oil, mainly because it's affordable, but it smells pretty nice, kind of woody. So enter what kind of soap you're making and the amount of soap that you're making. So I'll be making cold processed soap, and it's about 56 ounces or so. And I always go with the medium scent strength. Here are some of the supplies that you'll need. I use some rubber gloves, some heat resistant funnel pitchers, and I have this Starbucks cup. It's actually high heat resistant plastic. It is a recycle code number 5. So that's what I pour the sodium hydroxide into when I weigh it out. I have my immersion blender, some soap cutters, some essential oil over here. This is frankincense. I've also used eucalyptus oil before. Those are some of your more affordable essential oils. And I have this high heat resistant bowl here to mix the lye and the water in, and my spatula here, my silicone spatula here. And then this is just a tub I use for all of my soap supplies to keep them all together. I have my sodium hydroxide here. This one is food grade. And then we always keep distilled water on hand. You'll also need your oils of choice, and today I'll be using lard and coconut oil. So I have my 13.3 ounces of water here, and I have my 5.3 ounces of lye. And I'm gonna pour the lye into the water, careful not to splash anything, and mixing slowly. When you mix, the lye is gonna heat up, and you'll know it's done when you no longer see pieces of lye in there. And then you can just set this aside and let it cool off to at least 100 degrees before you mix it with your oils. Okay, so I'm gonna start by mixing the lye outside. And it gets very hot, up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's also kind of fumey when you mix it. So it's best to do it outside or just in a very well ventilated place. It's also smart to protect your skin and eyes with protective gear. I also wear gloves when I'm mixing. If you do happen to get the lye solution on your skin, don't panic. You can just go rinse it off in the sink. So the #1 rule of soap making is to always add the lye to the water and never add the water to the lye. I guess you can cause some sort of lye volcano. I've never done it. When you're mixing lye, it is smart to use plastic, and you'll want to use high heat resistant plastic. The ones that are recommended are the ones with the recycle code 5 on the bottom, and the ones with the recycle code number 2 on the bottom. I have my lye water mixture here. I have my immersion blender ready to go. I have the 8 ounces of coconut oil and 30 ounces of pasture-raised lard. And then I have my essential oil ready to go. I don't want to pour it ahead of time because the smell is crazy. All right, let's do this. All right, so we finally reached a light trace. And trace isn't really a technical term. You know it's reached trace because it's thickened, kind of like a pudding consistency, and you can kind of see the drops leaving marks on the top of the soap. So now I'm going to weigh out our oil. And that wasn't really too bad getting to trace. I think it took under 10 minutes. So now I'm going to add the frankincense essential oil to the soap. And I'm going to blend that in really well. So now it's time to pour the soap into the mold. And some people get really fancy and put some additives on top, like dried flowers or some oats. But I'm not going to do any of that today. I'm just making a very simple bar of soap. So once your soap is in the mold, you'll want to wrap it in a towel and put it somewhere warm for 24 to 48 hours. You'll want to cover the top. Right here I covered with a silicone mold, but in the past I've just covered with a piece of cardboard. And that's just to keep the towel out of the soap. And voila! It's been 24 hours now, and here is our finished product. The reason you want to wrap your soap in a towel is because your soap is going to go through gel phase. Gel phase is the heating stage of saponification. Once you pour your soap into its mold, it will start to heat up. Gel phase starts with the soap turning translucent in the middle and then spreads out to the edges. So unfortunately, this soap here didn't fully reach gel phase, and you'll see that in a second. I'm not really here to make a pretty bar of soap though, I'm here to make a functional bar of soap. And to use the supplies that are available to me, which is pig fat. We have a lot of pig fat because my husband is a farmer. So here you can see like a circle in the center that's darker, and the center has reached gel phase and the edges have not, unfortunately, but that's okay. So here I'm using a crinkle cutter, but of course you could just use a straight cutter. And then I am placing my soap standing up and with spaces in between it. And I'll leave it for 4 to 6 weeks and let it harden up a bit more. And that's just for the longevity of the soap. The bar of soap will last longer if you let it harden. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more like it. And stay tuned for my next video to see me make another bar of soap with some interesting ingredients. Alright, bye-bye guys.